This episode contains discussions of sexual abuse and suicide. These topics may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Please take care while listening and feel free to skip this episode or pause at any time if you need to. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to a new episode of Tony and Sarah Unscripted. I am very excited to welcome my dear friends Eddie and Tim to this show. We got lots to talk about today, but Eddie, let's start with you.
Okay.
So, you're gay?
Yeah.
Okay. And you and Tim have been married for how long?
Since 2014.
Did you know that, Eddie?
He's better with dates. He can tell you dates we've met and
Okay.
not as good.
Okay. Did you always know that you were gay?
That's a tough question because I remember thinking that I would grow out of it, that this will stop when I'm like 17, 18. So just to get right into it, I was sexualized at a young age and I wasn't sure if that had caused this feeling, you know.
Mhm.
But listen, I wasn't good at sports. I wanted to play with girls. I was obsessed with Sonny and Cher. I have no idea what the attraction there is for gay men, but I know as a kid, Sundays at 7 p.m., CBS, Sonny and Cher.
What is the attraction? Do you have
I
that?
have no idea. The camp. I think it's the camp, that the campy
There's a camp?
women. No, the campy women.
No, it can't
They're
be.
just,
It's a phrase.
No, there's camps too, but anyway.
yeah. I don't know why. They always say that gay men were attracted to these flamboyant women, and I just remember that, Sonny and Cher, it was like the Carol Burnett special, and then Sonny and Cher, and I was fascinated. I had no idea that I wasn't the only gay man watching it. I didn't, but there was a fascination, and I can look back and say, I was gay back then, clearly.
But obviously, I know a lot of the story. You didn't want to be
No, God, no.
because of the stigma, because of religion.
It's hard to say. When I had an understanding of what I was and that this wasn't going away, so in 1980, I'm 13 years old, and AIDS is prevalent, and I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school 8 years. Tim did 16 years of Catholic school, but I don't remember. No one ever said, if you're gay, you're going to hell in school. But there certainly was a hell. We knew the commandments, we knew we knew things. If you're not good, you're going to hell. So I knew that. But when if you're a sinner, you're going to hell, and you're seeing AIDS is God's punishment for gays, and they're going to hell. And, I had a cousin who was gay, and he was a little bit more, he was flamboyant, and they would refer to him as a faggot. And I was like, I can't be that.
Yeah.
I can't be that, and it's weird. I'm one of 6 kids. We grew up on the Upper West. We lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan until like 1976. And I think it was a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. And then we moved to Queens. So we went from being in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood on 108th and Amsterdam to a predominantly Irish Italian neighborhood. And I say that only because my parents, my mom worked 2 jobs. My dad worked in Manhattan and wasn't really around. But so we were 6 kids that were left to raise each other. But I'm number 5 of the 6. And so I'm on my own. If I leave the house, I'm being beaten up and tormented for being a sissy and for being a spick and not, belonging. And then at home, there was physical violence. Even within the siblings, there was physical violence. So I couldn't understand, and then I had this like gay thing where I'm having sex with men at such a young age. And to me, it was love. It was comforting. It was love. I was getting money when we had none. So it felt like love.
Yeah.
But I was like, it's got to stop. This has got to stop. I have to get a girlfriend. You know, it's weird, but you're trying to figure all of this out on your own at 10, 11, 12. You have no idea, you know? And 7th grade confirmation, I did mescaline. Before I think I even had a drink, I did a tab of mescaline and
What's mescaline?
acid.
In 7th grade?
7th grade confirmation.
Confirmation.
Do it. You're going to do it. Do it then, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Wow.
Yeah. St. Sylvester's, we hung out with older kids, and I did that. And I did it a lot, you know, and then there was drinking, and it certainly quieted and numbed the thinking, and you know, as Tony and I were talking earlier, you know, it was a sense of numbing that you do. I don't know, it was just a lot for a kid to process. But I have to say, all the while, I had this relationship with God, you know, because the nuns would say, ask and you shall receive. I hate that, but they would say these things because I would ask, please let this stop. Let this all stop. Whether it was the beatings from my father or the kids going to school in a dirty uniform, no homework, being humiliated by the nuns, you know, just all of this stuff. And I would like, please, why? What did I do that I was born into this family, into this situation, you know, with these, all of this? It was a lot. And I just remember wishing I would die. That started early on. Plus, I had a father who was a rageaholic, not an alcoholic. He was just a rageaholic, but he would often tell us he wanted to die. So I heard it. That was a message that was, you know, a solution to this issue. You don't want to live, you can die. And I would talk to God, but to no avail. Nothing. And I thought there's something wrong with me. I am some kind of a mistake or something. But, you know, then the drugs and the alcohol became more of a scapegoat. You know?
Like a medicinal, where they
self-medicating.
they just really help. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
This your story, Tim, too? Is this part of no?
Quite different.
Okay. Much easier?
Yes. Yes.
But was it hard in its own ways?
Yeah, hard in its own ways. What Eddie and I have in common is I don't want to be this. Like I knew at a young age, and I did not want to be that. But, you know, sort of my upbringing and my experience and my journey is different than Eddie's. But what we share is this, dear God, please take this away.
And I think, you know, back then, because, you know, back then in the 80s, I was a lesbian, believe it or not. And it wasn't, and when I was growing up, it wasn't like it is today that you see it. You see successful, you know, people that identify as gay or trans or something like that. So back then you really felt isolated and alone. And to be a kid in that environment, it was terrible.
Yeah.
It's not like it is today where, you know, there's conferences I can go to and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And Eddie and I are 10 years older than Eddie. So, you know, 10 years back in the 60s and 70s, you know, is a big span of time. And things didn't get better for the community until many years later.
Right.
But there is that age difference too. So just generationally, you know, I'm sure that has its uniquenesses. But yeah, my story is, you know, for sure by the time I was in 6th or 7th grade, I knew I was gay. And my coping was just shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. I grew up in, you know, a small community in the Midwest, and there were no role models for homosexual men that I could see anywhere. A couple of drag queens outside the one and only gay bar downtown that, you know, even in high school, you know, heading home, you know, with my friends, driving past it, I'd see them outside, and that was like, and hide, and just try to assimilate and be straight. And, you know, just hide that. And I I did that, and I ultimately, I dated girls, etc., got married, and I was married for 30 years and have
30 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
To my ex-wife, and have 2 amazing kids and 5 grandkids, and
Wow.
number 6 on the way. And by and large, we had a really wonderful, family life for many, many, many years. And I had told my wife when I was 25 that I was gay, and before we had kids. And that was obviously,
Married at the time?
yeah, just married a couple of years
Okay.
before we had kids. And that was obviously a real difficult period, but neither of us wanted to get divorced. And we marched on and just kind of like shoved that back down. For sure, I know that I allowed her to believe that that was just sort of a phase, or was it really my preference? And so we
Can I
marched.
interject for a
Yeah.
second? Didn't you talk to a priest with her?
So the day
boy.
that I told her, we were living in Chicago. The day that I told her, she reached out to the nearby Catholic parish, met with a deacon, and he was wonderful for her. And she told me about it that night, and she said he would like to talk to you too. And I said, absolutely. So I did, and I went to meet with him privately. And in that conversation, we're talking, and he finally says to me, we don't know where this is going to go, right? Our conversations, we should meet again. We don't know where this is go. We could fall in love, you and I.
I'm sorry, the priest?
Yeah. And I was like,
Sorry.
first of all, no, we're not.
What?
And secondly, there will not be a next time. And I remember I had such conflicting feelings.
That's
because
fantastic.
he had been so good for her. He was there for her in a moment where she just needed that person to listen. But I did tell her, I said, the guy hit on me.
That's wild.
What did she say?
She took it in stride. She never went and saw him again, nor did I.
Gosh.
But then we just marched on with the rest of our lives. We ultimately moved to the burbs and, had our kids. And, almost 30 years later, at one point, when my kids were getting out of high school, etc., I revisited the conversation, told my wife that I'm gay, and within a matter of weeks, told my kids, all my siblings. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. I am blessed with wonderful siblings and parents, and that's where our experience, our families are critically important to both of us.
Yeah.
But my home life was different than Eddie's. Mine was more vanilla, traditional, mom and dad and 7 kids. And I think of my childhood as a very happy childhood. Told all my siblings one by one, called everybody and told them. So I just kind of came out to my family, not to my coworkers, but my wife and I still didn't want to get divorced. I still didn't want to, but I just had to shed this burden. And I remember saying to her, I can't spend the rest of my life pretending to be this straight guy that I'm just not. And so we went to a therapist who dealt with mixed orientation couples, and
Mixed orientation.
There's such a thing.
And she was a
Specialty.
wonderful therapist. She really, really was. But
I think this will be his half.
and then
I'm about to
Land
cut
the
him off.
plane.
No, don't. Wait a minute. I want to.
So in wrapping up, 4 years later, I finally just said, this isn't fair to you, and I just and I don't want to continue to try to be this straight partner, husband for you. And so we separated and ultimately got divorced. But
So you were, say, 22-ish when you got married?
24.
24.
Mhm.
What were you doing at 24?
I was married to a woman. It's a long story.
Did I know that?
But no, probably not. Just one thing I want to interject.
Okay, go
is,
ahead.
Tim is of the generation that had he come out, he probably wouldn't be here because
Yeah.
100%.
Oh,
100%.
a lot of that generation is gone. He probably
that's
would
like
have gotten
the
AIDS.
Cured movie that we just watched. That's
Yeah.
that's that age group, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was a little older.
I don't know. What year were you born?
In May, I'll be 68.
Yeah. Well, they're all dead now, the people that were in that documentary. They're like,
Well,
That's true. They were.
yeah,
a bit
they were
older,
all
yeah.
So aside from
actually
having the
passed away.
Yeah.
grandchildren and the children, he has his life that probably would have been a whole different story had he come out.
But his journey also is not like yours because it was difficult for you to come out, but when you did choose to come out, you had support, lots of support, right?
I did.
Whereas you did not. If you
So-
did, it would have been.
There's a couple of things I wanted to say when Tim was talking. I have always been very attracted to people who have strong spiritual faith. I just go toward them and I want to know what they know because I struggle. Even now, as I go to church I try to go to church every Sunday. We pray every night. We read this, we call it Vespers. We do this, we just read a prayer. We started during Advent. But I try to have a strong faith, but I don't. But I try. A lot of it's fake it till you make it. But I've had friends who were priests in grade school there was one priest in particular, I think he knew what my family life was like, and he was very kind to me. Never inappropriate. I've never had any kind of inappropriate friendship or relationship with the priest. And I've had very good friends who were priests. But you asked me before at 24, what was I doing? So I will say at 18, I tried to kill myself with about 14 sleeping pills. I wanted to die because I was in love with a man and I knew it was wrong. Well, I thought it was wrong.
Yeah.
And I was in so much pain and I called a priest at a church and said, I'm going to kill myself. And took these 14 sleeping pills. I slept for a day, probably. I don't remember. And again, it was because I didn't want to go to hell. I was scared. I didn't want to live. I just didn't want to live. I ended up calling this priest back a week later, and he was so mad at me. I never met him. It was just a phone call, and he was like, I did not know what to do. I couldn't reach you. I had no idea. This is like 1980.
Yeah, that's no. Yeah.
Anyway, at 24, I did marry a girl who I'm an actor at singing lessons, dancing lessons. My voice teacher knew this woman who needed a green card because she couldn't get legitimate work in New York City as an actor, dancer, singer. So I married her. And in the back of my head, I did this because I was going to use this as a front. She was going to be my beard. I was going to pretend I was straight. This is who I'm going to introduce to my family. And I don't know. I had some kind of depressive episode during this period. And at 25, I really tried to kill myself. I overdosed. I don't know. I took about 30 different pills, sleeping pills. And I think it was the generic form of Prozac, and ended up in a hospital and had a seizure and had my stomach pumped and a tar and all of that nonsense. And, I wish I could say that, before they let you out, they're like, do you still want to hurt yourself? And, you say no because you want to get out.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, I just don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And that's, something I still deal with. And one of the prayers Tim and I read at night, that there's a certain line that every time I say it, I'm like, it's not true. And it's, I'm grateful for the air, the breath in my lungs. I'm grateful for the breath in my lungs. And I'm like, I wish I were. I wish, Tony and I were talking before, and he forgives himself for the way he self-harmed. And I was like, wow, I never even thought about trying to forgive myself. But just this feeling of, am I really grateful to be alive still? I don't know. There are times that
That's being really, really freaking honest. And I love that about you, really, to share that deep, because I don't hear too many people say that. And I think a lot of people might think that, so that's really, thank you for being this honest on the show.
I'm grateful that you're still here.
Thank you.
And I have always been impressed with your faith. Something keeps bringing you back to it.
Yeah.
Because you've said to me that you feel like God hasn't answered your questions or hasn't answered your prayers.
Right.
But yet you keep praying. You keep going back to him. So there's I'm like, he hasn't given up after all these years, right? I mean, he's never been like.
Yeah. As it relates to our faith, clearly our spiritual journeys, they're very individual, they're very personal, but also much of it is shared between Eddie and I. And I think just our Catholic tradition that we're brought up in, community is very important. It's personal, it's individual, but it's also about community. Eddie talked a little bit ago about did my Catholicism or my faith and religion impact my thinking about being gay, or was there guilt? And there was no guilt whatsoever for me as it relates to my faith. I just didn't want to be gay. And I shared this with Joe once when you guys were at our house. I went to a Catholic college, one of theology teachers, and it stuck with me forever to this day, introduced this concept of being a cafeteria Catholic. And he was a priest. He was a theology teacher. And the message was, listen, there is your relationship with God, your spirituality, and then there's religion as an organized institution. And the doctrine of the Catholic Church was written by men centuries ago. So those are two separate things, your relationship with God and doctrine. And the message was, if there are pieces of Catholic doctrine that don't resonate with you, you don't agree with them, that's okay. You're a thinking, discerning individual, cafeteria Catholic. And if something does not make sense and you don't subscribe to that thinking, it's okay. And it doesn't make you any less Catholic. I'm not supposed to get communion because I'm a divorced man. Forget the fact that I'm gay and what the Catholic doctrine has to say about that. But my point is, I got no use for that. Yeah. And I don't let that disrupt my desire to continue in my Catholic faith. I don't consider myself any less Catholic. I just don't agree with 100% of doctrine. Show me a person who truly believes, and I'm sure there are, but institutions in general, does everybody really buy into 100% of the doctrine of whatever religion? I don't, but I don't let it get in the way of my practicing my Catholic faith. And I don't carry any guilt whatsoever as it relates to being gay and being a Catholic. I truly believe in my core. For whatever reason, God placed me on this earth as the person that I am, and that's not a mistake.
I love how you said that, because a lot of people always question me about, are you a Buddhist? Are you Catholic? What do you believe in God? You don't believe in God? And I do believe in God, but my relationship with God is between him and I. And most of the time when I'm talking to him and I'm listening to him is when I'm meditating or I'm walking, taking a nice long walk, or I'm dealing with something, but I don't have to sit in a building with other people to say that I believe in God. And a lot of people say, well, come to this church, you'll like it here. I don't want to go to church, And so I don't think that makes me any less of a believer, So I love that you said that. Yeah.
Tim and I walked away from the church, the Catholic Church, for many reasons. One being their thoughts on homosexuality, but we had tried different denominations. We tried weird stuff. And ultimately, when we moved to Connecticut, which was in 2024, October 2024, for whatever reason, I said to him, I want God to have a strong presence in this house that we live in, and I want to go back to Mass. And immediately it felt like this is where we belong. This is what we knew. It honors what we were raised with. We share that faith. We may not be going to church, but we often talked. Every Lent, we would watch Jesus of Nazareth because it's what we grew up with. Or watch something, the Ten Commandments. But, there was something I was going to say about having faith and not. Do I believe in the virgin birth? Do I believe in everything that's in the Bible? I don't know. I really don't. But what I learned in AA is how to pray. I pray to know what God's will is for me. You said you meditate and you hear God. Drives me nuts. Because I know praying is talking to God, meditating is listening to God. I
Yeah.
do nothing.
Yeah.
So I still feel like I'm a defective somehow because I don't get it. I don't, I try to discern what God's will is for me versus my will.
Yeah, but maybe sometimes when you're not really listening, you're hearing. If you know what I'm saying, like in the silence, the answers come. But sometimes if you're sitting there saying, "Okay, give me that answer," and you're waiting for it, you might not hear it, but you could be washing your car, and then all of a sudden you're going to hear it. So don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
I think because you're here right now and you're the energy that you give to this space, you're hearing a lot, and you might not just realize it.
I also think that you are a messenger of God.
Yeah.
And here's why.
Huh.
When Cameron was in the hospital going through everything, many people texted and emailed and sent me things. You would send me prayers. And even the other day when you were like, don't forget it's Friday, you can't eat meat.
Well, as a practicing Catholic, we don't eat meat on Friday.
And
Oops.
sent me a prayer that the last time we got together, you sent me a prayer that night. And I was like, God's coming to me through him.
Isn't that
it
something?
was interesting. And I don't know if you look at it that way.
When I'm in AA, you're a mess. You the way I drugged and I drank and the things that I would do sexually and acting out and everything, it was a mess. It was a mess. 3-day benders, just craziness. And I'm able to take that experience and share it in a room with strangers who I don't even know most of their last names. And somehow they get hope. I'm 23 years sober by the grace of God. That's the one thing I can say was by the grace of God that I didn't walk into an area. I was taken to Silver Hill in Connecticut, New Canaan, Connecticut.
Yep, I know Silver Hill.
Because I was having a mental breakdown. I was scared I was going to kill myself again. So I checked in there, told them my story. They said, you should consider going to AA meetings while you're here. And I said, well, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't drink every day. I just don't drink every day. When I drink, I drug, I'm gone for 2 weeks, but I could go months without drinking. But if I do drink, it's on. And they said, well, you should try it out. And the third tradition in AA is the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. The more I went to AA, the more I had the desire to stop drinking. I was like, something's got to, something, I have to change. These people in this room are getting better. And I'm hearing my story and theirs. I may not drink every day, but I'm hearing the self-hatred, the struggle, the religious, their deficiency of God in their lives. And, so when I share that, and I do pray about it, I pray to be of service to people in AA whenever I have to share my story. And, so I'm very conscious about that.
Yeah.
You just reminded me about, as we mentioned earlier, both Eddie and I, as children, high school, whatever, prayed not to be gay. And that particular prayer didn't get a response that we are what we are, right?
Yeah.
But we sure as heck prayed to take that away.
But there was nobody there to tell you either that there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
No,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And so that was certainly my prayer. But fast forward, we, as I mentioned earlier, we were made perfectly by God in my mind. And now here we are in 2026 sitting down with you guys, and we have these wonderful friendships. And if there's one single person who watches this and says, wow, I see my story in these guys, and therefore feels less alone, then there's a reason that we were made the way that we are. And if we can help one single person by telling our truth, that reminds me of, there's a reason.
Well, let me just say this. You've already helped me. I mean, your stories are amazing and your strength is remarkable.
Well,
it's very
incredible.
Inspiring. So,
And I let me
Go
just say
ahead.
this, and
Yeah.
I know we have to wrap it up, but I did say when I talked to you and you about coming on, you were like, yeah, of course I'll come on. But Eddie was more like, well, what is my story going to do? And I was like, Eddie, like you're missing your purpose of being here.
And you both of you really are amazing speakers. I mean, I listen to the two of you, and I can actually see you both on stage talking to kids. And really, I'm being honest. I mean, but thank you. I you know what? I think we should invite them back.
Yeah. Would you guys consider coming back again?
Because we have so much more. We might have to do 2 or 3, 4 or 5 shows. Who knows?
Yeah.
This might just be the show from now on. No, I'm kidding. But no, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, really great, guys. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Tony and Sarah Unscripted.